that happened, and we like still drove and made it to the mall.
Yeah, but at that time, when we parked, I started to bawl my eyes out. And Sonmin was so lovely in holding that. And of course, I felt this like implicit safety with you to even go there.
I mean, I have been trying to say you're some kind of gay.
Yeah.
I just need you to figure it out.
Yeah, but that's not to say that when I did transition, that it was just like, perfectly fine after that. That made us reevaluate our relationship a bit, or re-navigate it in the way we were seen in the world. Yeah. So anyway, you held me in my realization, which became a painful realization. And after I cried and got myself together, I drove us.
We drove home because we're like, well, we can't go clothing shopping right now. That doesn't make sense.
No, it didn't make sense.
I mean, you could, but it's like, it's quite difficult to buy new clothes when you're confused about what gender you are. And it's why also gendered, like a segregation of clothing isn't always so helpful, And I think it's almost like it made it seem like it was such a big deal. And I actually do remember when we then, after you kind of came out and started going shopping, and for you to sort of like cross over this line, quote unquote, of like now looking at the women's clothing section. I don't know why I just put that in quotation. It's the women's clothing section. Like, for yourself, it felt like, even though you know that there's not an actual line in the store, I mean, a lot of the times actually the stores are quite divided, but like, it just felt like a huge deal. It felt like a lot of like, I mean, I think, for the first while, it felt like everything that we were doing was like, not only being hyper-analyzed by ourselves, but also like, maybe we were just hyper-aware, as if like people were also watching us.
And they were.
And they were. And yes, and in some instances, for sure, they actually were, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had a shaved head at that point.
It's true, you had been shaving your head all throughout COVID, which also was so interesting when you think about just like what was happening even before. Like, yeah, we talk about sort of like the massive disruption of losing the job, but like I think there was some process that was already happening throughout COVID.
Oh yeah.
And like, yeah, when you started to shave your head. But even earlier than that, you also started wearing nail polish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, I think like, I mean, I think there's actually probably so much to talk about between like the time of coming out and now. And of course, also you should mention, it's like when you first came out as trans, well, or more actually, I think you first came out as maybe like, you were like, maybe I'm non-binary.
Yeah, I was starting to use she, they pronouns. Yeah, because I didn't see myself as like femme enough. And
I mean, it was hard to, I think, immediately.
Yeah, it was. And I didn't start HRT for the first like couple of years there. So I was just like, it was a purely social transition. Yeah.
And I guess because it was 2023, April, or something like that, is when you started HRT, hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah. In case you don't know what HRT is, hormone replacement therapy.
likely people do, but still, it's important to
Yeah.
share that. But yeah, I think so. I think all of that led to. I mean, of course, like you realized in June, and then you came out to your family, we came out to my family, because I had already come out to your parents technically, even though they're like, oh, whatever. They didn't ask a lot of questions. I don't even think I actually like sat them down and was like, I'm queer. I remember just like kind of telling your dad that like, yeah, I'm queer, And because also when we were living with them was like when I was doing a lot of this like exploration in a big way. I really took it on.
Oh yeah.
During that time.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that like I was like this misery that you alluded to before, that was following me and us around, was really starting to impact our relationship for the worse, like right after we got married. And so when we were living in that situation, part of your leaning into queerness was to kind of almost seek refuge for yourself, to have your own community that was really not dealing with my craziness.
Not craziness, just a struggle. A lot of unchecked mental health struggles. Yeah. And like you were starting to understand them by partially like actually, your mental health like worsening. It's kind of like helps you really be like, oh, okay, this is like, there's some depth here,
Yeah.
But I think like also, for both of us, when you think about, especially nowadays, how like the average age that people get married, we were both fairly young. I was 25 and you were 29 when we got married. Mm-hmm. So, 29, because it was the year you were turning 30 when we got married, I guess.
Yeah, like basically a month and a half later, I turned.
Yeah, you turned 30. Yeah. And so like, I think that's also part of it was like we always kind of wanted to give each other a little bit of that space. Even though I think it took us a long time to maybe do it more intentionally to give each other some individuality. Because when you get married so young, you don't really know and you're trying to figure it out. And you're just trying to figure out what it means to be married, let alone like, who am I as an individual in this relationship? I think it's we got there fairly quick, and I think to your point, it was kind of like, I think not only queerness, but I think, even the decision to move in with your parents did have a lot to do with like, I needed to like sort of share the burden, or not the burden, but the weight of like sort of your mental health struggles with your parents. I was like, I cannot, it's too difficult to be solely like, I'll just say responsible because that's how I felt. I felt responsible. Mm-hmm. But that was in hindsight that I realized, okay, maybe that's why I was also so down to move in with the in-laws.
At that time, we were just in it.
Oh yeah, we were just in it. Yeah, it's hard to have hindsight when you're so in it.
Well, yeah, it's impossible.
Yeah. It's impossible, but
it was a tough time, and it's so interesting when I realized I was trans. I, of course, started to look back at these moments in my life personally and in our relationship. And, you know, no relationship is perfect, but I think it is safe to assert that our relationship is tremendously better and healthier now than it was in 2016.
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, when we think about it, we had experienced our own, like, our rock bottoms of, I think, the relationship. And I don't even think that it just, like, everything just, like, got perfect as soon as you came out or you realized that you were trans. It still took a lot after that, I think, because, of course, like, I think there was a lot of, we both felt obviously a tremendous relief when you came out, because then there's almost a little bit more tangible thing that you're like, oh, okay, now I understand that this was a big part of your struggle, actually not knowing, because the fact that you really did not know that you were trans for 30-something years, 35 years, I think. 34 years.
34 years and like 10 months, 9 months. Yeah. So, yeah.
To be very specific. But to kind of be like, okay, this is like a very real thing. Of course, we know that there were other mental health things that you were struggling with, but you also realize that, you know, there's this sort of fundamental thing when you are so out of alignment with yourself and you're basically like trapped in this like masculinity and toxic masculinity expectation, and also feeling like you can't meet that.
Yeah, I never felt like I was man enough, you know,
and you were not.
Yeah.
So it makes sense.
Yeah. But like to have to struggle with that not being man enough and not knowing that I was trans because I was misconstruing my attraction to women, to femininity, as like me being cis.
And straight.
Yeah.
Like I think if we've talked about this a lot, where I think as trans women, trans femmes, if you are also attracted to girls, or if you are attracted to girls, and maybe you weren't even allowing yourself to be attracted to other genders before, you're kind of like, okay, but I'm definitely not a gay man.
Right.
Or like, that's not so obvious. Like, it's not, your sexuality is not screaming at you. Mm-hmm. And so you're kind of like, I don't really know what this is. And of course, there are other trans women who also have, you know, trans fans who have stories about like knowing from a much younger age. Yeah. But that was not the case. And so you don't really know what is going on. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
why
like that
it's
struggle,
so hard.
Not knowing and not being man enough was really, really hard. Was untenable after a while. And it was a slow progression. And I wore masculinity, I'm going to say it, I wore it pretty well in a lot of ways. I worked out and got buff. And of course, you know, you talked about how like that was changing, like this lead up to the realization was already happening in early COVID days. And I remember that at the end of 2020, I was like, I'm gonna take a break from working out like my upper body and all that stuff, because I needed a break. And then we get into 2021 and I'm like, I had no desire to get back into it, and no desire to even, like, my desire to look like this ideal, you know, chiseled man, a masked person was like waning. And I didn't know what that meant. And like shaving my head was almost like kind of a, I don't know what I was doing, but it was like, it was a sad, messed up time. But then moving here, and the change, you know, the work situation, it made it safe for me to finally realize that, you can still be attracted to femmes and be a girl.
Yeah, I mean, you had to learn a lot about queerness. And luckily, you had been learning kind of for many years. You know, we have talked about, like, I still think about the fact that this was like back in 2014 when I had just graduated and I had just moved back to Vancouver, and we were going on this little, well, it wasn't a little, but it was like a 3.5 week trip to Europe. And I gave you this one book to read, and that was Redefining Realness by Janet Mock.
And I was fascinated by that book.
I mean, Janet Mock has such a, you know, like a life story to tell.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I still think like, wow, what, like, how did I know? I mean, of course, at the time, I think coming out of like what I studied, women's studies, feminist studies, I think like generally just like, I think highlighting and uplifting trans women, Black trans women's like life stories, and like, you know, this was like the kind of what we talk about as like a peak of, you know, I remember seeing Laverne Cox on the cover of Times magazine, and it literally said the transgender tipping point. And so it was such a time of like, oh my God, look at all these like brave, like in particular Black trans women who are just like on the front, like out on the mainstream, out in the mainstream. And I think that was also, I mean, of course it was like about time that, you know, trans women were kind of getting the spotlight, but of course like so much has changed, or rather so much has like gone sideways because of that spotlight maybe. But yeah. I just remember being like, you have to read this. Like,
yeah.
You have to read this book.
I was so enthralled with that book.
Yeah.
And like, also, I had not met many trans people throughout my life at that time. But whenever I guess saw depictions of trans women on TV or encountered them in life, it wasn't a kinship, but it was something close to, like, I wanted to be in with them.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, that can be confused with being attracted to trans women, which is, you know, totally a thing. But yeah, you know, all these little steps led to me finally realizing. And so I was in the closet, but I didn't know I was in there.
It's true. You really didn't. And I kept trying to be like, it's almost like by trying to tell you that you are, like, I think because when I came out, I was like, okay, but like, one, by extension, you are in a queer relationship because you were in a relationship with a queer person. And I was like, you are some kind of gay. That it was almost like I was trying to put you in the closet, which is funny because it's like,
or like having me realize
that you were in it. You were like, you were also in there.
Yeah, because like, you know, we've talked about the fact that you've loved the moments when I've let my guard down.
Yes.
When I've acted really cute, or you know,
it was a huge thing. Yes.
Yeah, like when we first got McGill, our cat, it automatically made me go into this higher pitched voice. which was just very natural for me and still is. And you liked that side of me. And I didn't really understand why you liked or felt safe with you liking it or liking it myself. Because of course it was, you know, going in the face of what I was thinking I was supposed to be.
I just thought that I liked like cute, soft, not manly men.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, you know, my own also kind of identity journey, if you will, was like, I think I felt, because of also our relationship, you know, I was very much, and I felt like it was like, okay, like, I think, you know, I can try on sort of, you know, being bi, calling myself bi, see how that feels. And I think now I also feel a lot more comfortable, like identifying as a lesbian, but I think that wasn't always easy for me because, you know, being married to a man, I felt like it was very difficult to claim that. And also, you know, we had been together since I was so young that, you know, not like I had a lot of experiences to know that for certainty that like I could be anything else, you know? So
Yeah.
I guess like, yeah, I mean, I think there's so much still more to unpack, but I am curious kind of, you know, we did this like very kind of high or like big overview, though lots of kind of details that we have shared kind of throughout that time. But, you know, in like 2025 now, and we have been like this like openly queer couple, lesbians. What is your favorite thing about being queer or being in this queer love? What is your favorite thing?